for being a part of the Teacher Virtual Academy. We have an exciting agenda planned for you, filled with insightful activities, engaging activities, and plenty of opportunities to connect with fellow educators. Before we dive in, we need to build up our spirits to be ready for a lot of knowledge we will get. I have prepared a jargon for our event, so I need smart teachers to turn on the microphone later after I show the example. Are you ready? So our jargon would be, if I said Teacher Virtual Academy, you guys can answer it by be smart. Is it understandable? Okay, please turn on the microphone. Okay, we can do it together, right? If I say Teacher Virtual Academy, you can answer it by be smart. Okay?
Okay.
Teacher Virtual Academy,
Be smart.
Okay, thank you. So let's dive into our agenda. There are some general rules during this event. The participants must have their own Hello account according to the guidelines provided before the class starts. And I'm sure all of smart teachers have already gotten their account. So the next is participants are required to fill out and upload an integrity pack as one of the requirements for obtaining a program certificate. Is there the integrity pack? And the integrity pack must be submitted no later than 4th of August. The next is participants are required to upload a photo for the program certificate, and the Google form link will be provided later. Participants are required to attend all classes with an attendance tolerance of 80% to obtain a program certificate. The next is participants are required to complete all quizzes and final tests to obtain a program certificate. Participants must register their attendance on their Hello account 15 minutes after the class starts and are only given 2 hours to fill in. Participants attend each class session from 1 to 2 and 30 in the afternoon. Participants can only get information and materials from each participant's Hello account.
Yes.
Okay, to ensure a smooth and productive experience today, there are a few housekeeping rules during the class. Participants are required to change the Zoom display name to the format institution and then /name. Participants must turn on the video camera. Participants must turn off their microphones unless permitted by the host or moderator. Participants are advised to activate the virtual background provided. Participants are advised to wear neat and polite clothing. Participants must attend class in an orderly manner. And 15 minutes after the class, participants made attendance on their respective Hello accounts and were only given 2 hours. Participants are required to attend the class from the beginning to the end of the session. So let's take a quick look at today's agenda. We will start with a keynote address from our distinguished speaker. There will also be dedicated time for Q&A and networking. Don't forget to participate in the interactive polls and activities. We want to hear from the smart teachers. Now, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Miftahul Huda, who is a linguist, researcher, book author, editor, English teacher, lecturer, reviewer, translator, and interpreter, and also a language consultant. His educational background, the first is Bachelor in English Literature, State Islamic University of Malang, Indonesia. Master in English Language Education, State University of Malang, Indonesia. PhD candidate in Applied Linguistic and Literature, University of Antwerp, Belgium. And he also have a lot of professional experiences. Some of them is CEO of Lingua Institute Malang from 2016 till 2020. A guest lecturer, Vocational School, University of Brawijaya Malang, 2011 until 2020. Editor and proofreader, Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund, IIGF, 2023 until now. And 2010 until now, he is an editor of UIN Maliki Press and also tenured lecturer, English Literature Study Program, UIN Maulana Malik Ibrahim Malang. Okay. After this, Mr. Miftahul Huda will share insights on the topic EFL to ELF, implication for teacher education, offering valuable perspectives and practical strategies for enhancing our teaching practices. Please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Mr. Miftahul Huda. Mr. Miftahul Huda, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Corina.
How are you today,
Sure.
Mr. Miftahul Huda?
Thank you, thank you. I'm very well, and you?
I'm so well, thank you.
And is it my time now?
Yeah.
Okay, can I share the screen?
Okay.
Wait. Okay, I will take my time for 1 minute. There is a little problem here. Um, can you see my screen?
Not yet, Pak Miftah.
Or can I ask the help for the operator maybe to share the screen of mine for the PowerPoint slide? Is it possible?
Saya aja. Pak Hafid will help you to share the screen.
Okay, so everyone is seeing Pak Hafid's screen then. Okay, can we start?
Yes, Bapak.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel more honored to speak in front of very dedicated educators. I see some of my colleagues here from Malang and also my teacher, Bu Galuh, I think is here, and Mas Asadi, who is also one of my colleagues. Some are also, I think I know some of the names, and I feel more than glad to share some of my insights in this occasion. I would like to talk about the theme on EFL and ELF, English as a foreign language and English as a lingua franca, and I'm going to focus later and to see how the shift from EFL to ELF framework give implications for teacher education. Okay, next slides, please. Right. I'm going to start my presentation by overviewing the historical development of English language. I would like to highlight some moments that leads English language gain its privileged status until today, so that most of the people in the world speak and learn English language among other languages. What I mean by expansion in this context is the growth or the extension or the development beyond geographical limits. So when I talk about English expansion, is actually the spread of English language to new regions or new communities, and that happens often through colonization, migration, or cultural influence. And we know that English is learned and spoken outside its country of origin, let's say United Kingdom and United States of America. Now, how does English language gain its high status as one of the most valued lingua franca today? Now, we can see that it started from the colonial expansion in around 16th to 20th centuries. So the expansion of the British Empire played a very crucial role in spreading the English language around the world. because as Great Britain established its new colonies during 16th to 17th centuries in the America, Africa, Asia, and Pacific, then English became the language of administration, the language of education, the language of trade, at least in those regions or in those colonies. And the establishment of English-speaking settlements in North America and Australia also contributed very significantly to the spread of English language. And the second factor is the economic and business dominance. Around 18th to 19th centuries, Britain was facing the so-called Industrial Revolution, which significantly triggered its economic power. So English became associated with commerce and technology due to its Industrial Revolution, and it's strengthened the global position or the global presence of English language itself. And British companies expanded operations overseas as the impact of the Industrial Revolution, and English very soon became the common language in industrial business and commerce. Now, the third factor is the cultural effects. Right? In around 16th to 19th centuries, we know that British literature, media, education system has a great impact on the global cultural landscape. For example, the works of William Shakespeare are studied worldwide, and British schools, British universities also have attracted international students from 16th to 17th centuries. At that time, we also know, for example, BBC, that is established in around 1920s, that operated overseas, and English very soon again became the common language of international business, international economy, in international industry, in international media as well. The third factor is the rise of United States domination in global politics. After the World War II, the United States became the dominant global power, both economically and culturally. The influence of the United States cinema or American cinema, the American music, American television shows, and later the internet is very great. That's a very huge impact. And the US also played a crucial role in international organizations like the United Nations, NATO, for example. And in those organizations, English is often used as the working language. Now, the fifth factor is the globalization and the information age. In the late 20th century or in the early 21st centuries, there is rapid globalization, and English becomes the lingua franca in many international contexts, such as in business, in science, technology, and the internet and digital technology then accelerated the spread of English itself, and much of the world's digital platform, digital content is produced in the language of English, and English became the dominant language of international communication, the academic research, the popular culture, and also we cannot ignore the role of international organizations in which they use English as the official languages, such as in the United Nations, European Union, World Trade Organization. And this official status strengthened the role of English as a global lingua franca used in diplomacy and international relations. Now, what is the impact on education and language policies? Now, many countries have adopted English as a second language or include English as the core subject in their education systems. And this is partly because of the perceived economic and social advantages associated with English proficiency, because people perceive or people assume that they will have the economic and social advantage when they can master English very well. English is then often used as a medium of instruction in higher education institutions, and some international institutions, international universities of international schools use English as its medium of instruction, and it's strengthened the global status of English language. I think we can come to the next slide. We can see the top 20 languages by total numbers of speakers in 2021, right? As of 2021, the estimated world population was approximately 7 billion people, and the number of English speakers globally can generally categorize into those who speak it as the first language or native speakers, and those who speak it as a second language or non-native speakers. And when we see from this graph, approximately 300 million to 355 million people speak English as their first language, and around 900 million to 1 billion people speak English as a second language in 2021. Now, when we calculate the percentage of English speakers, assuming that 300 million to 350 million native speakers and approximately 900 million to 1 billion non-native speakers in a world population of 7 billion in 2021. So we can estimate that approximately 25% of the global population speaks English, either as a first or second language that's combined both native and non-native speakers. So we can say that a quarter of world population speaks English in 2021, and the number might potentially increase in 2022, 2023, or even this year, 2024. Okay, now the next part that we can probably see is how we try to re-understand the next slide. We can try to understand the concept of English as the first language or English as the second language in the next slide, please. Okay, this is very familiar or very popular concepts for you, for me, for those who concerned in English language teaching, about how English becomes the L1 and becomes the L2. The concept of English as a first or second language is actually very relevant only in the context of monolingual or bilingual societies, because the concept of L1 and L2 helps the practitioners or the academics to distinguish between different roles and different levels of English proficiency in this context. In the context of monolingual society, for example, in monolingual society where English is the dominant language, such as in the United States or in United Kingdom, English is typically the first language for most of the population. So in US or in UK, English serves as the primary means of communication. But the L2 context in monolingual societies in the United States of America means that non-native speakers who live in America or who live in the UK, they learn English as a second language. These people, for example, include the immigrants, the international students, or workers who speak different language at home. So they have their mother tongue at home with their community, but they speak English with their community. So that's what happens to immigrants, that's what happens to international students in US, for example, or in UK. The distinction between, or the difference between the L1 and L2 users in monolingual societies, that the L2 users of English in US, UK, okay, they integrate into an English-speaking environment in US or in UK, for example, and they are acquiring English to function very effectively outside their home, in their daily life, in education, or at work. Now, I think I'm still on the previous slide. The previous slide. Slide sebelumnya mungkin. Yeah. Okay. Now, why? Okay, after that. Okay. Why does the concept of L1 and L2 matter? Why do people discuss about the dichotomy of L1 and L2? Now, the distinction between English as the first and second language that highlights the differences in language proficiency, language fluency, and language use. Because native speakers of English, they typically have a more intuition of language, while second language speakers, they may have different levels of proficiency and depending on the exposure and their learning. And the implications is also visible in the educational and policies, because understanding whether English is used as L1 or English is used as L2, that can help the formulation of educational policies, the curriculum design, and maybe the language support programs. For example, the L2 programs, the L2 learners or L2 students, they might need additional resources. They might need additional media, additional materials, or specialized teaching approaches to achieve fluency rather than those who use English as the first language. But there is a limitation in the concept of English as first language or English as a second language, because as I told you previously, the concept of L1 and L2 only works very well in monolingual and bilingual societies. In multilingual societies or in multilingual countries where many languages are spoken, people speak with different languages, like in Indonesia, the L1 or L2 binaries or L1 and L2 distinction that becomes blur and that becomes unclear, because people like us, Indonesians, use multiple languages almost at the same time. They use it in the morning, they use different language in the afternoon, they use one language to one person and different language to others, and they master 2 or 3 languages at the same level, depending on the context. They use multiple languages interchangeably, right? In this setting, then the concept of English as the first language or the concept of English as the second language is becoming more fluid, that becoming blur. And the concept of L1 and L2 may not represent very fully the complexity of language use and language proficiency in a multilingual society. What I want to say is that the L1 or L2 framework is useful for understanding language acquisition and language use in societies where 1 or 2 languages dominate. But the concept of L1 and L2 may be less applicable or may be oversimplified in a linguistically diverse society or linguistically diverse countries like Indonesia, like Japan, like China or India. The next slide, please. Okay, now starting from the dichotomy of L1 and L2, then we also understand the concept of ESL and the concept of EFL, right? ESL stands for English as a second language, and EFL stands for English as a foreign language. Now, the distinction between ESL and EFL is quite problematic. That I'm going to later. The difference between ESL and EFL actually related most to the context in which English is used and English is learned, used in daily communication and learned at schools. When English is used as a second language, means that it refers to the situations where English is not the native language, but English is used extensively in daily life because English functions as the official language or the dominant language in multilingual countries, like in India, in Nigeria, the Philippines. But the concept of English as a foreign language means that English is not extensively used. It refers to the context where English is not used for daily communication, so it is not extensive, but it is primarily, highly learned in a formal education setting at schools or at universities, such as in Japan, in China, in Brazil, in Indonesia as well, in our country. English is not commonly spoken in our daily life, like in international business, but the government has the very serious educational policies to use or to learn English at schools, right? Now, we know that the problem actually lies on the term how extensive English is used, right? Because ESL refers to situation where English is used extensively more than EFL. Now, there is a possibility that EFL users or people who use English as a foreign language, they develop into ESL users because of several conditions, such as, so some people who use English as a foreign language, maybe after several times, they will use English as a second language, or a country who has English as a foreign language will develop or will transform into the ESL users because of several factors, such as the economic integration and globalization, because some countries become more economically integrated into global market, and there are demand of English proficiency, especially in business, in trade, and in tourism, and that leads to great exposure to English through work, and people use English more extensively because of economic integration and globalization. And also the increased access to English language media through television, movies, music, internet, in which people then can immerse into English language and culture more. And probably because of the migration, such as in domestic or international migration can also lead to the increased use of English, especially in the urban areas with diverse population. In the country in which I am pursuing my PhD, in Belgium, there are two big regions. The first one is called the Flemish regions, whose language, the people in Flemish region, like in the province of Antwerp, in Ghent, in Kortrijk, in Leuven, they use Dutch language. But in Wallonia regions, like in Brussels, like in Liège, or like in Hasselt, they use French. So when people from different regions, they are at the in the same country of Belgium, but they come from different linguistic areas. So when they migrate or when they meet, they communicate, they use English. And English transforms from English as a foreign language to English as the second language. In some cases, some countries may adopt English as an official language or a key language of administration and governments, and they can shift from the users of English as a second language to become the new users of English as a foreign language. Now, the status of English can shift with EFL users becoming more like ESL users because they start using English more extensively in a broader range of everyday contexts. Now, there is also a shift from the traditional dichotomy of L1 and ESL, EFL to the broader of native speakerism, in which I'm going to explain later. We can come to the next slide, I think. The next slide, please. Yeah. Okay. Before that, yes. There is a shift from the traditional dichotomy. Slide yang sebelumnya sepertinya. No, yang sebelumnya mungkin. Yes, yang ini. Yeah, there is a shift, a conceptual shift from the traditional dichotomy of L1 or first language and ESL, EFL concept to the broader ideas of native speakerism to non-native speakerism. In the past, people speak about whether English become the first language, the second language, or the foreign language. That's what happened in the past. But that is the traditional dichotomy. But nowadays, people pay more attention to the ideology or to the norms of native speaker versus non-native speaker. Now, in the traditional dichotomy of L1 or ESL, EFL, we understand that the term L1 or use of English as the first language, it refers to the users of English who learned that language from birth and use that naturally in their daily life. And it carries the assumption of a native level fluency. And the ESL refers to the use of English by speakers whose first language is not English, but they use English regularly in dominant English-speaking environment. While EFL refers to English learners in environments where English is not commonly used outside educational or professional context. Now, the limitation of this concept of L1, L2, or first language, second language, foreign language is that it is too simplistic and binary because the L1, L2 frameworks, it tries to oversimplify the realities of diverse language learning and use. And it focused too much on language proficiency, and it underestimates the presence of cultural and identity diversities. And the concept of L1 or L2 that refers too much about the language competence, it sometimes ignores the ideas of cultures, the ideas of identity, the ideas of complex linguistic backgrounds. And therefore, today, people shift from the concept of L1, L2, or from the concept of ESL and EFL to concept of native speakerism versus non-native speakerism. Now, what makes it different? Native speakerism here describe the privilege of native speakers of a language as the ideal standard of language use and proficiency. this kind of native speakerism ideology or privilege, it carries the assumption that native speakers have inherent linguistic authority. They have better cultural understanding and they have superior language skills. That's the assumption, right? While non-native speakerism refers to the stereotypes against non-native speakers, because it usually carries the assumption that non-native speakers are less competent, they are less authentic in their use of the language, and their language is not standard. Their language is not ideal, right? The shift from the ideas about ESL, EFL to native speakerism or non-native speakerism here actually reflects the awareness of the academia about the bias and the imbalance of power between native speakers and non-native speakers in the linguistic landscape. Now, these unfair advantages of native speakers may receive because non-native speakers, they sometimes receive discrimination, right? They experience discrimination in employment, in education, in social contexts, and they are undervalued sometimes in terms of their linguistic abilities and their contribution to the development of English language. Now, the new conceptual framework of native speakerism or non-native speakerism also recognize that linguistic competence is not only about grammar and about pronunciation, but it also includes knowledge and pragmatic skills. And it also includes the ability to communicate effectively across cultures. Now, what I want to say is that the conceptual shift or the conceptual changes from L1, ESL, EFL to native speakerism or non-native speakerism actually reflects the broader or more inclusive understanding of language use, because it acknowledges the complex realities of language acquisition, the culture and identity dimension in language use itself, and the need to challenge the bias and the domination of native speakers in their contribution towards the development of English language. Now, this kind of shift or movement is a part of larger ideas towards valuing language diversity in a more globalized world. Next slide. Slide berikutnya mungkin. Okay, so we can see that from this map that the number of non-native English speaking countries has exceeded, and they dominate actually the use of English across the globe. We can see that the people who use English not as their mother tongue or not as their first language, the number exceeds, or the number dominates the whole users of English in the globe. The next slide then. Okay, now in a more globalized world, English is then used as a lingua franca by people from diverse linguistic backgrounds, as we can see from the previous map, right? So we have different terms, English as a foreign language, or EFL, and English as a lingua franca, or ELF. Now, ELF stands for English as a lingua franca, and that refers to the use of English as a common language of communication between speakers of different native languages. So there are a number of countries whose native languages are not English, and when they communicate, they use English as the common language of communication. Now, ELF, the concept of ELF here represents that English is used as a bridge for communication in contexts where speakers come from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds, because it can facilitate various settings such as international business, education, travel, for example, online communication. And the focus of ELF, or English as lingua franca, is on mutual understanding. So the primary goal of ELF interactions is mutual understanding. Whatever the accents the people have, as long as they understand the message, so that is understandable, that is acceptable. Effective communication is prioritized over grammatical accuracy or over the use of native-like language, and the emphasis is on getting the message across communicative success, right? Now, in ELF interactions, the majority of participants are often non-native speakers of English, right? and their focus is on effective communication rather than try to showing how they can communicate like native speaker or by following native speaker norms or native speaker grammar, native speaker pronunciation or vocabulary. Okay, we can come to the next slide then. Okay, I want to show you how the idea of native speakerism or non-native speakerism has impacted the global English language learning market, because the privilege that is held by the English native speakers has also triggered the market value of English language itself. In some countries that use English as a lingua franca, or let's say use English as a foreign language, the value of the native speakers are always considered higher than the value, the economic value or the social value of the non-native English speakers. The next slide, please. Slide berikutnya mungkin. No, before that. Okay, now I want to show you the circles proposed by Kachru that maybe some of you are already familiar with. On Kachru's concentric model, Kachru introduced the so-called inner circle, outer circle, and expanding circle to refer to those who use English as their native language, those who use English as the second language, and those who use English as foreign language. But in the context of native speakerism, we can associate this inner, outer, and expanding circle to saying that inner circle are the norm providing, the outer circle are the norm developing, and the expanding circle are the norm depending. So they depend on the norms, on the standards that is provided by the native speakers. The question that we should raise at the moment is that, is native speakerism still relevant in today's English as a lingua franca context? Native speakerism here refers to the belief, to the assumption, or to the belief that native speakers of English are inherently superior in their language proficiency compared to non-native English speakers. This belief or this concept is actually challenged by a number of academia in the last 10 or 20 years, especially in the context of English as a lingua franca, because in the context of ELF, English is used as a means of communication between non-native speakers of English. So there is nothing much to do actually with the strict standard or with the strict norms of native speakers. In ELF context, then native speakerism is problematic because there are diverse English varieties. Right? English is spoken in many different forms worldwide, and the idea of single correct or standard form of English is always questioned until today. And in the context of global communication, for example, the primary or the most important goal of ELF is effective communication among speakers from different linguistic backgrounds. And this makes the presence or the existence of native speaker norms actually becoming less relevant. And the concept of standard English is very complex actually. So what is called by standard English at the moment? That is becoming the topic of the debate until today. Yes, standard English refers to the form of English that is considered authoritative and correct. That is considered authoritative and correct in formal settings, and it usually follows a particular specific grammatical, spelling, and pronunciation rules. But the idea of single or unified standard English is probably not very relevant today because the standard English is the construct that is by design introduced by and maintained by the inner circle countries to strengthen their domination. Yeah, we know that several tests or standard tests are still based on the inner circle assessment, right? And the persistence or the preservance of standard English can be considered as neo-colonial attitudes because the language practice of dominant countries it is upheld as the norm, and it can marginalize other English varieties such as Indian English, Singaporean English, Malaysian English, and others. And we can also see the so-called the native likeness syndrome, right? Native likeness syndrome refers to the tendency of English students or English learners to use English as a second language or as a foreign language, and they want to speak, they want to write exactly like native speakers. And this kind of syndrome actually have several implications as well as several benefits, by the way, for different groups. Like for the inner circle countries, the native likeness syndromes, such as what happens to most of the Indonesian students, probably, right? There is a cultural and economic capital benefits for the inner circle countries because the prestige or the advantages, the privilege associated with native speaker norms that can strengthen, that can enhance the economic value of English language and the economic value of the native speakers themselves. And it also allows the countries in the inner circle to influence more the global English language practices, right? And for the native speakers, they have the perceived, the assumed superiority because native speakers might benefit from a perception of linguistic superiority, and that can influence the social and professional dynamics because it can lead to unfair treatment towards the native speakers or non-native speakers. In some cases, native speaker norms used to justify hiring practices that give favor or give privilege to native speakers and create some disadvantages to non-native speakers in job markets, for example. The next one. Next slide. Okay, this is my personal notes on the EFL or ELF classroom in the periphery. In the periphery means like in the Southeast Asian, in South countries, right? EFL, or English as a foreign language learning and teaching, that's often goes beyond just language acquisition, because it also involves the cultural transmission. And the concept of EFL that sometimes associated with the broader Western cultural norms and values, such as linearity and logic in writing. Now, let me try to give an example in writing, for example, right? English academic and professional writing frequently emphasize linearity and logical structure. And this means that arguments or narratives that are ideal or standard in academic English is typically presented in the so-called clear or straightforward manner and clear progression of ideas. And this kind of writing style actually reflect the Western values, and the Western values of the order, of the rationality, of the parallelism, and so on and so forth. Also, when English language teachers tries to teach grammar or try to teach speaking, for example, there are more emphasis on the use of active voice construction, for example, by saying the researcher conducted the experiment instead of, for example, the experiment was conducted, blah, blah, blah. We in English tradition, people should be very brave to say, I can conclude that, but it is very difficult in the Indonesian context, for example, because some Indonesian students still think it can be concluded, right? Because they tend to use the passive voice, right? And also the use of pronouns, because English discourse actually supports more use of the pronoun you, but not in the Indonesian context. And that is quite problematic, by the way, when we see that from the native speakerism norm or from the standard English classes, right? And the second things that I would like to emphasize from my experience as teacher is that most students still idealize the native speakerism norm, idealization of native speakerism norm. They want to write like a British. So the students may be very motivated to have the British writing style like Shakespeare, so write like Shakespeare, including with the specific spelling conventions, vocabulary, grammatical constructions, and they want to speak like an American. There is often a desire from several students to achieve an American accent and use American idioms or American expressions, and reflecting the influence of American standard of language. And they want to think like an Australian people, reflecting the Australian cultures, right? And and this kind of idealization might be driven by the perception that native speakerism or native speaker norms are more superior or more prestigious, and that can influence students' goals and students' expectation in language learning. What happens to the teachers? Now, in my experience and my colleagues' experience, also in my research, I can see that most teachers they are aware of the importance of promoting English as lingua franca norms. So they support non-native speakerism norms. Many educators, many teachers recognize the importance of appreciating local accent, for example, but there are still systematic tendency to favor or to give the privilege to native speaker norms in assessment, for example. We will see later how that is in assessment. So, for example, teachers might appreciate diverse language performance, but they still give privilege to the, they give more privilege to American or British accent, for example. The assessment criteria also give the privilege for that, including in what is considered as a good writing style or fluent and accurate speaking that still refers mostly to the Western standard. Can I see the next slide, please? Okay, this is the ideas of Kaplan concerning the patterns of written discourse. So Robert Kaplan's work on patterns of written discourse actually explores how different cultures structure their written communication. And Kaplan highlights variations in the organizational style across language. And Kaplan identified several different patterns based on the rhetorical tradition of different linguistic and cultural groups. Now, English, for example, English people or English writers tries to follow the Western linear pattern, right? So you can see that English writing tends to follow a linear or a logical progression because it typically begins with a clear thesis statement or main idea and followed by a series of supporting arguments or evidence and concludes with summary or restatement of the main point. So the writing, English writing is often, a good English writing is often organized in straightforward, in a direct manner, emphasize clarity and coherence as well as cohesion, right? And each paragraph usually starts with a clear topic sentence that outlines main idea of the paragraph and followed by supporting sentences with some detailed support or explanation. And that way of writing style is quite different from the Semitic people that follows the cyclical pattern, right? The Semitic languages such as Arabic or Hebrew, right, that often use a repetitive structure. So this kind of repetitive structure usually works by repeating some key themes or ideas throughout the text and give emphasis by repeating the ideas, elaborating or expanding the themes. And therefore, people who say, people who tend to write in Arabic and they have to write in English might probably feel very difficult because it involves the changes in the way they should write. Now, the Oriental people like Asian, Indonesian, Japanese, or Chinese, they follows the circular pattern, right? The organization of the writing of the Oriental people tends to be more circular, and the text may represent ideas that reflects the earlier themes again and again, and sometimes with strict linear progression. And we can find similar structure or phrases repeated for emphasis in the writing of Asian people. And when it is seen from the Western perspective, whatever the language is used, so the writing is considered not very well organized, because the way the writing organization is assessed is based on the Western, or based on the English values or English norms. The next slide is the overview of the assessment. I will have the presentation in 5 more minutes, I think. Okay, I would like to quote Brown's oral assessment rubric, for example. In Brown's Robert Brown, for example, gave the emphasis on the so-called pronunciation. And in this assessment, native speaker is valued very high. For example, in number 5, those who are considered having excellent pronunciation with the score 5 are referring to those who have the language of English equivalent and fully accepted by educated native speakers. And the lowest score in terms of the pronunciation is shown by errors in pronunciation are frequent, but the speaker can be understood by native speakers used to dealing with foreigners attempting to speak his language. So you can see in the pronunciation here, there is an explicit privilege of native speakers, because the standard of good pronunciation is always referred to the understandability of English by native speakers. We can come to the next slide. This is the assessment rubric proposed by Penny. Penny Urs has 2 criteria in the assessment of speaking, that is accuracy and fluency. You can see in Penny Urs scoring rubric that native likeness, or the ability to have the pronunciation accuracy as closely as possible to native speakers, is highly valued. So poor vocabulary mistakes in basic grammar might have a very strong foreign accent. So you can see foreign accents means that the accent that is considered not authentic, or the considered as not native-like. And for number 5, in terms of accuracy, high value or high score for accuracy is given to those whose pronunciation accuracy is native-like, and there is a very minimum foreign accent influence. The next one, I think this will be the last part of my presentation. What can we do then to accommodate the idea of English as lingua franca? Then we need to minimize the privilege of native speakerism and try to give more focus or more value to the aspect of fluency and communicativeness, because communicativeness not only depends on whether the pronunciation should be like native speakers or not, but there are multi-modalities that can be employed, that can be used by any speakers to make the interlocutors understand what a speaker is saying. So effective communication, for example, easy and effective communication should be given more value, rather than for example, too much focus on the native likeness, or to have the accent like native speakers. The next part. Okay, this is the scoring rubric for the writing that can be considered as whether we can then try to revisit the rubric that we use, whether we try to impose the value of native speaker or the value of inner circle or we can tolerate the local values or the local norms of the students. The next part. Okay, this is the questions for our discussion. We still have 20 minutes discussion. I have given my insights for approximately 60 minutes or 50 to 60 minutes. In the last parts of this session, I think we still have 20 minutes, and I want to hear the voice of the teachers. There is no right or wrong for this kind of voices. I want to hear the voices, the ideas, or the insights. How do the concepts of English as lingua franca influence your English classrooms? Would you accommodate them or not? Or do you still value, or do you still believe and give more privilege to the native speakerism norms and still believe in the norms provided by the inner circle countries? Or do you tolerate some of the foreign norms that are brought by your students in the classroom? So that's all my presentation, and I would like to give the stage back to Mbak Corina.
Thank you so much for Mr. Miftahul Huda for that inspiring delivery. We truly appreciate your insight and valuable takeaways you have shared with us. And now, before we move on to the next session, I would like to ask all of participants to turn on the camera video. Kami ingatkan kembali kepada seluruh peserta untuk mengaktifkan kamera agar forum kita dapat berjalan dengan baik. After this, our next session is discussion. Dipersilakan untuk peserta Smart Teachers, mungkin ada di antara guru-guru yang sudah hadir dari berbagai daerah di Indonesia, ada yang ingin berbagi pengalamannya terkait bagaimana penerapan konsep English as lingua franca di daerahnya masing-masing. Boleh silahkan mengaktifkan kameranya. Sambil menunggu, di sini ada pertanyaan dari Mr. Adi Hasan. At-tariqatu ahammu minal maddah. The way of teaching is more important than the content. How can the content we make in interesting way? Maybe Mr. Miftahul Huda can answer the question first for Mr. Adi Hasan.
Okay, thank you very much. In some ways, the method is probably, I don't want to say that it is more important, but there is a shift in the attention of pedagogy practitioners on how material should be brought in the classroom. Some things that materials is important, but the way materials is presented to the students is more important, because some students can absorb the knowledge or the skills depending on the models, or depending on the methods, right? Depending on the way of teaching. But some others still think that the content is more important than the methods. And we can see some classical teaching methods in Islamic boarding schools in pesantren, which is already preserved in several centuries. We know that in pesantren there are a number of generations in pesantren that have successfully practiced the so-called sorogan or bandongan method, which is probably too classical in today's era. So whether method is more important than content, or content is more important than method, that is a matter of choice, in terms of depending on the teacher's preference, depending on the school system, depending on the target or the objective of the teaching itself. In primary schools or in kindergarten, probably method is more important, but in senior high school or junior high school, maybe the balance, we have to find the balance between the method and the content. But in higher education, in which people need to get more insights, maybe the method is not more important than the content. So again, it depends on teacher's preference. Now, the next question is, how can the content we make in interesting way? It is not very much related to my presentation, by the way. Probably the next sessions will tackle a lot about how to carry the content in the classroom to be most interesting, to be as interesting as possible. But there are a number of basic principles in how teachers is expected to carry the materials or to teach the materials in the classroom. And when you follow these kind of basic principles, there is a tendency that it will be interesting for some students, but with terms and conditions, right? There is no one fits for all size. So there is no one size fits for all. It means that when it is applicable, when it is good for some condition, it doesn't guarantee that it is applicable to other contexts. Now, the first principle is to make the content we make in an interesting way. The first principle to consider is try to be as closely as possible with the students' learning style. There are a number of learning styles, like visual styles, like motoric styles, and some are audio styles learning. The closer we can design the content in terms of students' learning style, the more interesting it is for those kind of students. However, we know that in one classroom, there are a number of students with diverse learning style. And our task as teachers is how to accommodate all kinds of students' learning style. And that implies to our ability to cover or to accommodate any learning styles of the students, and we have to design the learning methods which is as various as possible, because in that way then we can touch students with diverse learning style, not only having a monotonous method of teaching, right? that is one. And the others, we need to consider the age. We need also to consider the authenticity of the materials. For example, students who are living in big cities will probably have different ways of learning and different topics, different interesting topics to learn, rather than those who live in remote areas. Students who studies in schools in the top of the mountains will probably have different different passion, different let's say different way of learning, and also different interest than the students who probably live in coastal areas or near the sea. So the authenticity of the materials, authenticity of the method is also important. I cannot provide one single or two methods that can fit in any context to make the content interesting, but to consider students' learning style, to consider the authenticity of the materials, also to consider the students' age, and many others are important, right, in designing the methods as well as the materials. If the moderator doesn't mind, I would like to answer the question at the chat from Ibu Nurhayati, Stai Samarinda, right? I am interested in native likeness syndrome. It really happens to our student, and the impact is that our local accent in speaking English is considered wrong. What do you think about it? Is it right or wrong? Or is there any concept we need to tell our students about it? Thank you. This is one of the biggest concern in the latest discussion among English as lingua franca academia or practitioners, because we cannot avoid the influence of our local accent, and striving too much or having too much motivation to imitate the accent of native speaker is not a wise position, by the way. Not only because it overvalue the native speakers, and undervalue our position as the users of English, but because it also has theoretical foundation that there is even no language in the world that has that is free from its accent, right? Even in Indonesia, is there any Indonesian original accent? That is very, very difficult to answer, because what we see from the media, that is probably Jakarta Indonesian language with Jakarta accent. But some other Indonesian people might speak bahasa Indonesia using Madurese accent, Javanese accent, or Sundanese accent, or Makassar accent, or even from Samarinda accent, right? And there is no pure accent, by the way, even in the so-called English accent, American accent, and British accent. And therefore, holding too strictly the norms or the standard of native speaker is not a wise decision. So we need to tolerate the degrees of local accent as well, as long as the message is understood by the users of English. Because by the end of the day, people will not consider much on how you say that, but people will consider much on the message that you carry, how you communicate that. As long as what the students say doesn't create misunderstanding, as long as what the students say, whatever the accent is, still understandable, we as the teachers need to appreciate that, because that reveals the equivalence in the rights or the privilege of any English users. So what I want to say, what the English as lingua franca supporters would like to highlight, by the way, is that all English users have the same rights or the same way in contributing to which kind of norms or which kind of standards should be upheld, as long as the message, as long as the communication between interlocutors, between speakers and listeners is guaranteed. So whatever the standard, whatever the norms, that can still be tolerable, that can still be understood. And that becomes our biggest challenge, because some of our students, as Bu Nur Hayati wrote in chat, some of our students still struggle for, still tries to have very great effort to imitate and to fulfill the standard or the norms of native speakers. I don't want to say it is right or wrong, but to strive for or to struggle for the standard of native speaker doesn't always mean good, right? Because the most essential part in English as lingua franca is communication and message delivery.
Okay, thank you for the answers. Maybe there's another questions coming from another educator. Or maybe any one of you want to share your stories or experiences in educating people, because we are coming from many different places. Any question? So then we have come to our end time. And I would kindly remind you to fill the integrity pact. Kami mengingatkan kepada seluruh peserta untuk mengisi fakta integritas yang akan dikirimkan melalui grup WhatsApp, kemudian diharuskan untuk di-upload melalui akun Hello masing-masing, tidak lebih dari 4 Agustus, dalam bentuk file. Kemudian kami juga mengingatkan untuk seluruh peserta untuk mengisi daftar hadir, karena daftar hadir akan menjadi syarat untuk penerimaan sertifikat. Untuk fakta integritas sendiri bisa diisi, kami ingatkan lagi, tidak lebih dari tanggal 4 Agustus sebelum kelas berikutnya. Okay. I would like to say thank you for all the participants and also our keynote speaker, Mr. Miftahul Huda, for a very insightful delivery. I hope this session will give beneficial for each of us and also the people around us. Remember to stay connected and continue the conversation in our online community. Keep an eye out for upcoming events and resources that we will be sharing. Once again, thank you for being a part of this event. Have a wonderful day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mbak Den.